Welcome everybody to the Bassfug Podcast. Today we have a very special guest. A little confusion on the interview times and stuff, but we did it, so it's a sign. I'd like to welcome Glowbrain to the show, aka Adam Caines. How are you today, Adam?
I'm doing very well. How are you today?
Oh man, well the whole, I sleep until like 2 p.m. So waking up early and then finding out we had the times messed up, I was just like, oh, what am I going to do now? Right?
Yeah.
So it's just folding socks.
It's one of those things. Yeah, it's one of those things. I used to be able to sleep in really late at one point in my life. And now it doesn't matter what time I go to bed. When I wake up at around, 8 or 9, it's just, I can't get back to sleep. So I do miss those days where I can push myself a little bit later in the day.
Do you produce better at night or in the morning?
Honestly, there's something to be said about when that night hits. I got to be honest, and I've heard other artists say that too, and I don't know exactly what that is, but when the night hits, for me, I would say the most productive time production-wise would probably be between 10 in the night and 2 a.m. And for whatever reason, that's just really the time that I can plug in.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about the nighttime, but producing at night, like you're saying, is definitely there's some weird energy there that you could tap into.
I think it's just, and not to cut you off there, but I think a lot of it is just the world is turning off a little bit. You know what I mean? And I feel like in the day, there's so much commotion going on, and I just feel more in tune with the music when the night hits and the world's a little bit more quiet. Yeah,
but isn't the morning quiet too?
That's true. And, and sometimes I will plug in the morning, and I wouldn't be able to articulate exactly why the night is, it's just one of those things.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned that you produce you have produced. What do you feel?
Well, it's weird. I don't know. I'm starting to learn later on in life that I think I might have ADHD. But so it's not, I don't know if I have it or not. I just watched some TikToks. On TikTok they have sometimes they have a psychiatrist and they're listing things. But the point of the story is that sometimes if I'm working on a song, I won't sleep. I'll just work for 12 hours straight on a track. So if I start at 8 p.m., I fucked my whole sleep over. I'm working till 8
a.m. Yeah, I get that. And I actually have a few friends who I think have ADHD. I've also been accused myself of having it. It's one of those things I don't really know if I do. I can certainly get on streaks where I can get super productive with a song. But at the same time, there's other times that, and I don't know really what it is, but I'll be really excited about a song. I'll have about 80% of it done, but getting that last 20% done, the polishing, the tweaking, the transitions, I'll end up just listening to the loop of the song before I can actually really push myself to get that piece done.
Yeah. Well, we all are a bit ADHD, I guess our generation, because of just obviously all the technology and just all the stimulants we have access to and stuff like that. Our great grandparents, they had to, they'd read a book. That's how they pass the afternoon. But
True.
Us, we'd be, we're playing video games, we're watching anime at the same time, and we're producing music.
Yep.
It's just so scatterbrained, right?
Yeah, no, and I've said this. I've had this conversation with many of my friends before. We truly are out of date machines, right? Our bodies weren't designed for these stimuluses that we have every day. From we have TVs, we have computers, now we have the phones in between. And I think we definitely do unfortunately suffer some ill effects from these things, right? And it's these reward circuits that we're forming in our brains. And I've recently watched a little bit more and read more literature on kind of resetting your brain and kind of getting away from that stuff. That's easier said than done. And I'm assuming the same would be for you because, screens and all that stuff are a pretty intricate part of my life, from work to play to production and stuff. So, but certainly something to think about.
Let's talk about that. It sounds really interesting. I totally agree with you. We're like a Commodore 64 and a Ryzen Threadripper kind of world, It's
Absolutely.
There's just too much stuff going on, and evolution, thankfully takes a long time. But because you imagine if we were just evolving so quickly, we'd be a mess, But we're in this sort of weird moment where it's like we can adapt, but I don't think our bodies are equipped to adapt so quickly. Like you see everyone's on some type of SSRI or some people have anxiety or people have sleep issues or whatever, and we're just slamming coffee, energy drinks, you name it, to keep us awake. And then, the recreational drugs, and then just you go to a show now. Before you go to a show and there was a guy, a guitar, a bassist, and a drummer. Now it's like WWF, WrestleMania. You have like 20 screens in the background, like smoke machines, lasers, and all this stuff. Let's talk about your exploration into this topic.
Sure. I just think it's just a sign of the times, and unfortunately, I don't think it's going to slow down anytime soon. And if anything, I think our reliance on technology and just how things go are going to speed up, and our ability to adapt, I don't think is going to get any better. It's just a matter of us just kind of taking that responsibility of trying to deal with it as best as we can, in accordance with our mental well-being and stuff like that. However, we may see ourselves doing that, right? I really don't have the blueprint on how to do that, but mindfulness certainly takes its place, just day to day and stuff. So whether it be, just unplugging and just getting out and just, being in nature or any of that stuff. So still kind of trying to figure all that stuff out for sure.
When you unplug, do you find that the creativity comes back or?
Well, that's a good question, and creativity, for me, and I don't know how you would think about this, but this is a little bit of a tangent, but, the creative side, and I've heard this many times, I've heard people articulate many times, with regards to being able to be creative, there's two types of people, two types of artists. The first type are the people who I think are a little bit more blessed in my eyes, are the people that can really hear these symphonies in their heads. You take people like Michael Jackson, and I even think from the documentary that I've seen about Tim Avicii, these are the kind of artists that literally hear these things in their heads, and they have it in their heads before they even go to sit down. Me, on the other hand, I'm the kind of person that I really don't know what I'm going to create until I'm touching my hand to the pads. It's more of an exploration, more of a discovery. I often wondered, can you learn that aspect of hearing things in your head? I think you probably could, but I definitely fall on the other side where I don't really know what I'm creating until I've created it. And I don't know how you would feel about that, or if you've ever reflected on that.
It's a feedback, right? And you're experiencing yourself. Mm-hmm. I mentioned this on the podcast a while back ago. There's this guy, R.D. Laing, not to be confused with Howard Stern, Mad TV, R.D. Laing, but there was a Scottish psychologist, Robert David Laing, and he wrote this book called The Divided Self, and then there's another one, The Politics of Experience. Anyways, in this book, he talks about sort of the existentialism of like psychiatry. He was sort of this kind of in-between kind of guy. And he worked with with Sartre and all these dudes. But the point I'm trying to make is that one thing he wrote in this book really resonated with me. And he says, you can't experience yourself as Adam. You know what I mean? You can only experience yourself through how other people experience you. So the reactions you get from like your friends, your girlfriend or whatever, you could go, I guess I'm a funny person, or I'm an asshole, or whatever, you know what I mean? But you experience that through other people. You don't know what it's like to be with you. So what this guy was writing was, when you start to do artwork and when you start to put like the pen to the paper, you're experiencing who you are by the mirror of the artwork that you're actually creating. So when you're saying the people hearing music in their head versus people that create music when they sit down and hit the keys, it's two completely different paradigms. What I'm hearing is one person is sort of a visionary, and then the other person is using their art to sort of experience themselves. Does that make sense?
That's actually quite profound. That's actually quite a profound idea.
So I think maybe what you're doing is, I've only met you for 10 minutes, but you sound like a smart guy, and I think you're exploring. You have a very inquisitive, exploratory sort of nature about you. And so I think I'm not your psychologist here. Give me $200 an hour.
I like it.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? But it seems like when you start making music, you're like, oh, like you're getting this vibe about yourself that you don't even really know exists. Because
absolutely. And it even lends to the idea sometimes where, like, I finished this piece of art and it feels so out of body. Like I'm just like sitting and I'm thinking, like, I can't believe I created this. I went through the motions and this thing didn't exist before I brought it into existence. I know that's getting a little out there, but I definitely have those moments as an artist. Absolutely.
Yeah. Don't worry. You can say whatever you want on this podcast. It's a very out there, you could go on long tangents. I don't care.
Fair enough.
Yeah. It's kind of amazing how, before you would make music because you wanted to have groupies and be rich and stuff like that. But now I feel like it's sort of getting to this point where, you could have a small following, but really have like the emotional fulfillment that is like unprecedented, like you.
Absolutely. Like, as an artist, I can't tell you how many times I've told myself, like, maybe it's time to put this to bed, or maybe it's time to step back a little bit, or, because I can only speak for myself. But as an artist, you tend to look back at your work and be like, ugh. Or, you just have moments, sometimes you think what you made is, oh my God, this is the song's going to change the world. Another time you look at it and you're like, crap, like this, I'm not feeling this anymore. But then once in a while I'll get that, that connect from a fan saying, hey, I went through a really tough time in my life, this or that, and it really, really helped me through this time. And just that connection is so profound. Because, I might have submitted this song to so many labels and stuff, and they're shutting it down or turning it away. Yet I'll get this, just one or two connections with these people saying how big of an impact this song had on my life. And I'm instantly like, okay, every part of that journey was worth it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So
let's switch gears there for a second. You said you connecting with fans. How do you connect with fans? What do you do to build a fan base for, say, like for a new producer who's listening to this show? How do you grow a fan base, and how do you connect with the fan base?
So I'm going to be completely transparent there. I'm still a work in progress on a lot of fronts. With regards to building, a following on social media, I think it's, part of it is really, sincerely reaching out to people, fellow artists and musicians, giving feedback, actually showing that you're actually interested in their art, and then they reciprocate that. Again, a lot of it is still a work in progress. I mean, building a fan base from a music standpoint, constantly making songs, getting better, making contacts. That's a big thing that I've noticed on social media is you just become a little bit of a community. So, you see friends of friends who are DJs or producers or singers, you add them, and then you slowly start making communities like that, right? A vocalist that I'm collaborating with on a few songs now by the name of Michael Lanza down in Los Angeles, we were just kind of, friends of friends with a few degrees of separation. And, he added me and, we kind of got to talking, and all of a sudden we have these, really cool collabs and stuff. But building a fan base isn't easy, right? Because we are in a very, very competitive, saturated field, especially with electronic music. So, I'm still really trying to crack the code on that whole idea of, people can, you can be on a playlist and people can listen to your song. It's another thing for them to be like, ooh, I'm kind of developing some sort of relationship with this artist, and I'm going to come back every time he makes a song. That's still, something that I'm trying to work on. And I think a part of that formula is basically just keep plugging, like just keep making music and keep, experimenting and trying to evolve, try not to be complacent, all those things. So yeah, it's still kind of, it's quite the formula I'm still trying to figure out.
Well, you said some things that I definitely agree with. But don't be complacent. I like that. There's just so much noise out there. The world doesn't need more angry tweets, But,
yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, no. And I mean with complacency too. The thing is, there's a fine line, and this is something I've always struggled with too as an artist. Is there's a fine line between creating your own sound and then becoming all your songs sounding a little bit too much like each other, and then trying to branch out and make another sound. but then you're still kind of holding on to that idea that as an artist, you should have somewhat of a signature sound. So there's a little bit of a back and forth there that you kind of have to, it's a kind of the line you have to tread. And again, a lot of it is just experimentation. It truly is, right? So certainly a lot of things to consider when you're trying to put music out there and you're trying to create a fan base. If I made a song that was, really hit a lot of people hard, my question is, well, do I make a song that sounds kind of just like that with a different mood? Or if I make that song, will people say, this is a little bit too much like his old stuff? I was hoping for something a little bit newer, a little bit fresher, original. So it's, you're always treading that line where it's really kind of hard to know what exactly to do a lot of the time.
Yeah. So how do you make contacts? You just go on the Facebook groups, or I guess with quarantine, you can't really go out in public anymore. Well, it's almost over now.
Okay, so this is what I would do. Like, if today I was like, I want to find a brand new singer, I would honestly go to a lot of the producers that I respect, kind of guys in my tier. Like, you can, if you want to seek out vocalists and connects like that, you could go to really high guys in the genre, like make like Millennium or Said the Sky or something like that. But their vocalists are going to be probably hard to contact. Really, really expensive to top and write lyrics. If I wanted to make contacts, basically I'd do a couple things. Number one, if I want to do it inside my own city, I go to Instagram and I'd look up popular hashtags. YYC musicians. I'd scroll through and I'd just, check out people's profiles, or if they're singing or what they're doing. That's one way to do it, right? And that's actually quite handy. Another way, if you want to do it outside your city, I would merely just pretty much go on Facebook, look at friends of friends. Like, it's a pretty big world out there, but when you start really kind of looking, at the community and stuff, it's not as big as it seems. And you end up making a lot of contacts, and, you'll find, for example, like a producer from back home in Newfoundland, Alex Byrne, who's doing quite well for himself, I'll end up finding out that him and I are, submitting our songs to the same labels, or getting on the same labels, or getting on the same playlists and stuff like that. So it kind of tells that it's not as big of a world as it appears to be sometimes when you actually start digging. Yeah,
let's talk about Newfoundland for a bit. As we mentioned earlier in the pre-interview, I'm from New Brunswick, and there's not a whole lot going on in Moncton, New Brunswick, or at least there wasn't before the internet. So 1996, 97. I was there just making music 30 minutes outside of town. Like, I didn't have any choice, right? Well, I did have a choice. It was play, PlayStation 1 or make music, and I really enjoyed making music. Did you start producing when you were in Newfoundland, or only when you moved?
So the journey to producing was a bit of a weird one, and I owe a lot of it to a dear friend of mine. Musically, I came of age in the 90s, and, I found guitar when I was about 13 years old, and latched on to Kurt Cobain quite a bit, and he was kind of a kind of a big inspiration for me. So I played in bands as I went up, and I was left-handed too. So Kurt was left-handed, so I always found a little bit of a kinship to him. Musically, then as the 2000s came in, I started getting into hip hop a little bit more, and all of a sudden Eminem came into my life. I was like, well, Matt, never really listened to hip hop in my life, but he was really quite that inspiration to really bring me into that side of music. It was in the 2000s that I kind of got away from guitar. I kind of lost my way with music a little bit. Still loved music as an entity, as something to listen to. But as a performer, I still had a guitar, but I knew there was something else I could be doing. Then I think it was around 2012, 2013. My vocalist, who I used to play in my band with, by the name of Alex Gillard, who's also a musician, he's back in Newfoundland. He's like, you know what, you should, I got a machine there a little while ago. You should get into this. I was like, nah. We were at the music store one day, and he was there, and it was on sale. I was like, you know what, I'll buy it. It ended up being on my wall in a box for at least 4 weeks. That's kind of just the way I roll. Sometimes I procrastinate. And then one day I took it out. I knew the learning curve was going to be a little bit annoying, as with any of this stuff. But as soon as I started getting into it, I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is exactly what was missing. So it was around 2013 when I really got into it. I didn't release my first song publicly. I think it was until 2015. So I was a little bit mindful with quality control. I think one mistake, I don't know if I'd call it a mistake, but certainly a judgment call. I guess it's subjective, but something that I find sometimes producers do is they'll get really excited and they'll release something right away after 1 or 2 months, right? I didn't take that path. I kind of just self-taught myself, trial and error for about 2 years. And then I finally released my first song on SoundCloud, which was nerve-wracking as somebody who's kind of just fresh. But that was really the trail for me to producing. Like, I knew even as a guitarist, I don't know if I was like an audiophile or a sound snob, but I remember always jamming, thinking like, oh, this just doesn't sound very good. Like, I wish I had so much more autonomy over how all this sounded. And when you're producing, it's a little bit, you can be a little bit more selfish, because you can you're the creator, and you can dictate what goes where and the structure and all the sounds and everything. So it's quite liberating when you're able to do that producing.
What is your earliest music memory? You said when you were 13, you were doing the grunge thing. Were your parents into music, or your guardians, or like an older brother?
So I get all my music from my mom's side. But my grandfather, he used to play violin. He was a very musical guy. My mom was, I think she was musical when she was a bit younger. My first musical memories, I was born in '83, so I would assume my earliest musical memories are listening to a lot of like '80s tunes and stuff like that, and going to buy the first maybe Snow. Remember Snow? I think that was in the '90s actually. I think that was '89 or '90. But New Kids on the Block and stuff like that. There's a certain nostalgia even now. Sorry? Yeah, exactly. Right. Oh my God. Like that, that was the bee's knees back then. And, there's a certain nostalgia. I find myself going back to a lot of older music, because music can be very nostalgic now. I find myself into a lot of 80s stuff, especially Tears for Fears lately. I don't know what it is, but, so that was really, and even before I got into guitar, I remember, I think it was 1994, I must have been 11 years old, and I was hanging out at my friend's house, and all of a sudden I heard, Smells Like Teen Spirit hit, and I was like, what is this? This is, 11-year-old or 10-year-old kid, something I never really heard before, and something at the time the world never really heard before, because, punk rock kind of just came out on the scene, or what they would call punk rock at the time. So I think that was my earliest musical memories. I turn it back on you, though. How about yourself?
Well, it's funny. We're about the same age. I remember the first time I heard "Smells Like Teen Spirit." I'm gonna sound like a snob, though. I'm gonna sound like a total.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, my father drove me and my friend Justin and Derek to Sobeys at Champlain Mall, and they had their Walkmans on, and then we park at the Sobeys. I don't know if you know Sobeys, right? You're a timer. And I remember they said, "Will, you got to listen to this song. It's the heaviest thing you'll ever hear in your life." So I put on the headphones, and then, clean guitar comes in, and then they stomp on the distortion. And then I remember taking off my headphones, and I was like, this isn't the loudest song I've ever heard. Like, I've been listening to fucking Motorhead's greatest hits for the last fucking 2 months, and the Sex Pistols and stuff. But so I wasn't really on the Nirvana train until Incesticide came out. And I remember when Incesticide came out, the one with all the B-sides from the Peel sessions or whatever.
Oh, I know Incesticide very well, yep.
Yeah, I remember buying that tape. Do you remember those Super Nintendo commercials when they tried to get all edgy, like Sega? And they had the Butthole Surfers song. Yeah. And so I remember going to buy that album, Independent Worm Saloon. Great album. And from the Butthole Surfers. And when I was there, the Nirvana Incesticide tape was there. So I bought that too. And I remember that was what really got me hooked on Nirvana, because I was like, holy fuck, it just sounded like so raw, Whereas Nevermind. It was raw. Nevermind. Yeah. It's. I could go. I love Nevermind now. Like I in retrospect, I went back and listened to it, but the raw sound of just like the cassette, it sounded like a demo. It sounded like a guy's band.
And Kurt loved that. That was right up his alley. And I should say, I mean, at the time, yes, Nirvana came out. It was something the world hadn't heard. And I mean that in a context, in a mainstream context. Because Jesus Christ. Yeah. You had the 80s. You had the most banging music from that era. Right? So there was lots of stuff coming out that was loud and ferocious and stuff like that. But and I do remember, I think after Nevermind, and I bet you any money that Kurt would probably agree that I don't think that would have been Kurt's favorite album. I remember when In Utero came out, I think he tried to go less mainstream, and I think ironically that album did just as successful as Nevermind. It might not have done as successful, but people loved it and ate it up.
What, In Utero?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course. He went to Steve Albini. He was like the guy who recorded all the famous, Chicago scene stuff, right? So and they had to do that in top secret. They but it's funny because I get asked, before I do all these interviews, I always have like a page of questions, but I could wing some questions here right now because I know we probably had the sort of the same upbringing or whatever.
Absolutely.
Because you watched much music growing up. For all those,
oh my God! Yes.
We have a lot of non-Canadian listeners. That's Canadian much music, and before the wedge, you had they're playing Metallica videos on much music and all sorts of heavy stuff, right? If you stayed up late enough, I'm just curious because for us, electronic music. When I started making electronic music, it was 1996. And I was really young. I was like a lot younger, and I remember it was just an uphill battle. Like my close 10 friends were into it, but like the rest of the world, the rest of Canada was like, what the fuck? And that the electronic music we saw was Barbie Girl, fucking Eiffel 65. There was no electronic music on Much Music, right?
Yeah,
maybe
it was
some
all
9 Inch
style.
Nails, So I'm curious what you think of the whole Canadian adoption of electronic music. It happened because of Skrillex, right? And maybe a little bit because of Kid A, Radiohead. I remember when Radiohead came out, it was more synthesizers and stuff like that and music. But what do you think of all that transformation from like the rock and roll to just straight electronic music in Canada?
I think it's inevitable. I think it's awesome. It's certainly interesting how it all played out. And I completely agree with you. Like when I go back, and I'm still finding myself in the off time going back to this music that I would otherwise call like not the greatest music, but I'm listening to it just to take it in, just to hear it, whether that's, Yeah Kid K or any of this stuff that we heard from Dance Mix 95, all these tunes and stuff, And I think, the thing is for me, coming up as a guy who played, Nirvana and Silverchair to Metallica to Slayer to Rage, all these bands, and being in like, this band all the way growing up and known for that. And all of a sudden kind of transferring over as electronic music producer, sometimes I do kind of wonder what a lot of my musical colleagues from growing up kind of think, like, because I know there is a knee-jerk reaction to electronic music. Electronic music for the longest time was associated with 4 on the floor, right? Or like boom, 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 that kind of dance element. Yeah. And of course, but then you had people like pioneers, people that really pushed the envelope, like 9 Inch Nails. Yeah. 9 Inch Nails made electronic music cool, and they were kind of electronic, industrial, hybrid, whatever. But I absolutely love 9 Inch Nails. I love Trent Reznor. I don't know if you've ever heard the Social Network soundtrack he did with Atticus Ross. Yeah. That is background music for me on any other day. I do love it. I do love, and I think what happened too is electronic music got a little bit out of the 4 on the floor and start, whether, you got the Crystal Method or DJ Shadow or things like that. Yeah. That's when people started kind of like, taking to it a little bit more. When I make electronic music now, you're hardly ever going to hear me do a 4 on the floor song. Not to say I don't like them or I wouldn't enjoy making them. Like, I guess house, any kind of house you would call it. It's just that it's just not my style. And where I grew up on all these bands, like if you really sat down and listened to a lot of the songs I made, you can kind of hear that little alternative influence in my songs. So I make a genre that's, I guess you can more or less call it future bass. Some of it's kind of trappy, but when you actually sit down and listen to the drum beats, like, and the structure of the song, it's almost tinged with influences from these bands growing up, right? Like the structure where you have the chorus, the pre-chorus, the drop's a little bit heavier. It's technically like a drop that people would associate with EDM and stuff, but that's really what I try to do. And I do that to try to, sorry, I had to close my window. I do that to try to introduce people who wouldn't normally be into this music into it. Yeah. I have had that where people or friends came out, I don't usually like electronic music, but I listen to yours and I can dig it. And that definitely gives me a sense of that I'm actually doing what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, because I don't think younger people realize that, I'm just guessing that Newfoundland was the same as New Brunswick, where everyone was into Eric's Trip and like Sub Pop Records and all that shit, and then like if I told anyone I liked electronic music, they would call me an F slur. They would say homophobic stuff, or they would be like, that's like stupid and blah blah blah. And it's funny how a lot of that changed, and a lot of people are retconning their own their own attitudes towards because on Much Music, the only thing they had was Electric Circus, and then like that bubblegum Europop stuff, and then there was sort of the industrial music that was penetrating the mainstream, like Nine Inch Nails, KMFDM, White Zombie, Ministry, and stuff like that. But it wasn't really like electronic. It wasn't like Aphex Twin or something, you know. And I think the first time Aphex Twin was on Much Music was like 1998, you know. So there was like a year there where they tried to get the Chemical Brothers and the Fatboy Slims. It was like a 2-3 year period where it was like kind of a rave thing. But after that, it kind of died again when Avril came out. And then for a while, until Skrillex came out, electronic music was still kind of taboo in Canada, you know?
Yeah, it really was. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if you agree with that, but...
No, I would. And it's weird what influence Skrillex had on the whole thing. It really was. I got to be honest. So the first time I did hear Skrillex, I think it was My Name is Skrillex, that album. I wasn't so into it. Dubstep just wasn't my thing, but it really started to grow on me a little bit. It was very inspiring, because I remember 2013, I think is when I started that music. And, I certainly tried to emulate him a lot with his arrangements and the way he made his drums like that and stuff, and the sounds and stuff. Still a bit of a student with sound design, honestly. I'm a little bit of an amateur with it. Every producer kind of has their weak spots, and that's one of mine. But yeah, it's quite crazy the influence he had. And another thing I do like about Skrill is, he made such an impact. And I don't know if you noticed for the last few years, though, he's kind of moonwalked back into the shadow a little bit. Like, he's producing behind the scenes. He hasn't released an album in a really long time. He really left on a high note. I even said to my friends there last night, I'd be like, I'm expecting him to put out some sort of an album here in the next few years. It wouldn't surprise me. Well, and I'd be curious to see what he does. Is he going to do bro step? Is he going to do something completely different? I don't know.
It must be nerve-wracking when you're like the guy. It'd be like he's that generation's Kurt Cobain. You know,
it's true.
It's like Kurt, imagine if Kurt, like, loved Nirvana, but like, what would have came out after In Utero, right? I
often wonder that myself.
Dave's tape, Foo Fighters, the first Foo Fighters album, was that supposed to be the next Nirvana album, right? And like, you would have to, and if you take like a grunge band that was that big, that survived, that were still alive, like Smashing Pumpkins, they fell off at some point, I
often wonder that about Kurt. Like, if he had just kept on, would he have quit music? Would he still be putting out lackluster albums to this day? Like, just trying to capture. I don't know. Like, I don't know. Kurt was a pretty interesting guy, and I don't know. It's a really good question. I often question a lot of artists, if they were alive today, really, what would they be doing? Would they be making music? Would they not? I guess it's something we'll never know. We can always ponder, I guess.
You're so going back to the sort of, I don't want to call it authentic music, because I don't want to degrade electronic music, but do you find that you're sort of what's the word I could use? Rock background when it comes to sound design. Do you use those elements? Because you said you have problems with sound design, but I'm sure that you probably use a guitar pedal every now and then when some people.
So here's the thing. I actually have a dear friend of mine. I don't have a lot of I do have a guitar and stuff here. I don't have that much equipment. But whenever I do want to get some guitars and songs and stuff like that, I actually go to my buddy's house here in Calgary. He has a great setup. His name's Mike Glowbrain, and he usually wails stuff out. And that's a good opportunity to get him on some of the music too. With regards to sound design, I certainly do. Like, whenever if you ever listen to a lot of my music, you listen to the really loud parts. I really try to emulate the drums of rock, or like the power chords. Like, I usually make these synth stabbing kind of synths that really almost emulate just like chords and progressions like that. So I definitely utilize that when I'm making things. The problem is again, like, happy with how a lot of these songs turn out, but at the same time, I'm like, I wonder, is this my sound, and do I keep going, or do I kind of step back from that style and try something completely different in the sound design? And that kind of lends to the idea again, creating your own sound and building an audience based on that, versus being experimental and having songs and styles that completely sound different from each other. And again, that's something I don't really have figured out yet.
Your songs definitely can be on the radio, like right now, you know what I mean? If they aren't already, and now talking to you, I get that you have a very extensive songwriting background, and an appreciation for it. And I think it really shows in your music that you have the structure down pat, and you have sort of the formula almost mastered, right?
Yeah.
I don't think it really matters so much the sound design so much as it's just your ability to write songs and make them sound professional. Like you can move to Nashville right now, I bet, and start ghost producing some people if you wanted to, honestly.
Yeah, for me too, like, the two facets for me when I think about it is, songwriting versus production, right? So I found my strongest points. I feel like I'm a pretty decent songwriter. Like even when I go back to one of the first songs I've ever done, it was a remix by Incubus, Dig. I remixed Dig. It was the second or third song I ever done. Even going back now and listening to that song from a songwriting perspective structure, that's almost basically bang on to how good I am now. But the production is something that it was a bit of a learning curve for me. So when I go back to really older songs, I'll listen to some of the production, I'm like, oh. And it's only when you start referencing it with how your ear is now that you kind of go back. Do other people hear it that way? Maybe not, because there's such a subjectivity to hearing music. But the production side was something that was always a little bit lagging. And that was due to me self-teaching myself and probably not taking as many tutorials as I should have. And that's kind of how I approach guitar too. Like didn't take a lesson in my life, just sat down and listened to Kirk Hammett wail out the Four Horsemen solo until now I had a bit of sheet music and stuff like that, but that was really how I kind of approach anything, and that's kind of for better or for worse. But the production, I feel like only now in the last few years I'm finally getting to a point where my ear's really good from a production standpoint. I have a friend of mine from Ontario who really helped me. Like for me personally, I always heard songs that were super compressed to be good. And it was only through the way he kind of helped me kind of hear it and gave me a lot of feedback that I realized, let's dial that compression down a little bit. It sounds way too squashed. But for the longest time in my ear, and again, because music is so subjective, I just heard that it's so good. But when I listen to old songs and just how I had them, I was like, oh yeah, they probably could have been a little bit better. But again, at the same time, still there is a subjectivity to that even in itself. So yeah.
I totally agree. There was a point in my life where I'm not sure if you heard of IK Media T-Rax tracks.
I haven't.
It's like, anyways, that movie Josie and the Pussycats? There's like this machine.
I do.
The machine that makes every song sound good. Well, this program, you would throw it in. It's kind of like Lander, or I don't know. There's a bunch of these programs now, but there's a time in my life where I would just over brick wall compress all my songs. I'd be like, oh, that sounds great.
I think that might be a rite of passage for every artist now that we're having this conversation. Yeah.
Let's talk about production a little bit.
Sure.
I wanted to talk about Machine because we get a lot of guys on here, and either they're using Ableton or they're using mathematical equations on some weird supercomputer thing. You know what I mean? So I've never interviewed someone who uses Machine. Can you talk about that and maybe talk about what you like and don't like about it? Because like I said to him, a buddy of mine, I'm going to interview him later, Yaron, who he works at Native Instrument, and I'd like to be able to pass some feedback on to him when he's on the show and maybe get some features added for you.
Yeah, so here's the issue is I only know what I know, so I don't really know what I'm missing. So with Native Instruments, again, it was the first kind of thing that I started on, and I could call it a DAW, but you get a lot of people that would push back, say, it's not a DAW. Don't call it a DAW kind of thing. But I'll use the term DAW just for the sake of the conversation.
Why do they say it's not a DAW?
Well, and I can't speak to this as much too, just because I just read that it's limitations with now. Here's the thing. It might have been like I don't know if I've updated my software in a year or two. Like it might have gotten a little bit better. I have a really old MK2 MIDI that I use, like the MIDI trigger. So it's one of the older ones. And it's a good, I think some of the arguments were it just doesn't have the capabilities that some of these DAWs with regards to recording and things like that. I can't speak too much to it, but I have remember reading threads online that have kind of crapped on a little bit with regards to its capabilities. So when I say I only know what I know, I'll say this, like I've never been at the point where like I can't do this on the machine. Now, I've never tried Ableton either. So it could be that, if I ever got acquainted with Ableton and it's just ease of use and its ability stuff, I could be like, oh my God, like this is so much easier, but I only know what I know, right? So I started off on Machine, and it's one of those things where it might be a little bit of laziness on my part, but like I'm so deep rooted in it and I know how to utilize it with everything that I need, that to kind of backpedal and learn another DAW completely just seems a little bit daunting at any given time. Does that mean I'll never do it? No, absolutely not. I have a lot of people around me who know how to use Ableton, and I might dig my teeth into Ableton at some point. I do think Maschine. Another thing I was going to say too is I don't know, you can ask your comrade there who works at NI, I think it's pronounced Maschine.
Oh,
and not machine, but I don't know. I think so. I think I've heard it in a commercial from NI, and they call it Maschine, right? Because it has that S. I don't know though. Maybe you can. That's something you can ask. But anywho, I think it's a great tool. But I'm not sure of other things that I'm not aware of that might have more capabilities with these other DAWs. But again, I'm never limited. And I'm sure you can certainly hear that in my music. Like, it does what it needs to do for me.
Historically, I pronounce everything incorrect on this show. That's why I always ask in the pre-interviews, like, is this how you say your name?
No, and I might be wrong, right? I don't know.
I just whatever. Maybe it's Machine. I don't know. I don't even know how you spell it. I'm recalling from memory. It's you touch on a point that I think is so freaking important. I think it's probably one of the most important music production tips ever, and it's just take the software that you like, and then just learn that. And it doesn't matter what's cool or trendy or whatever. There was a time when Logic was the most trendy thing. Or Nuendo or whatever. Gold Wave, and I think that's super important to just kind of pick one thing and just sort of master it. We've had some people on the show that are using the oldest versions of whatever, and they make incredible music, And I think that's for new producers. They just got to pick one thing and just stick with it,
Yeah, and I've heard that before too. I've heard a lot of people say, a lot of these DAWs, whether it be Fruity Loops or Ableton or Cubase or whatever, they're all pretty solid, right? And there might be a few things that some of these DAWs might have over the other, but at the end of the day, you should be able to get the job done with a lot of these, right? So, and that's basically where I am with the machine.
Can you use
and the
VSTs
sequencer and stuff like that. So I do use some, yeah, and you can, and NI's super versatile with that stuff. That's another thing is that I do have a few VSTs. You get a lot of people, and I mean it's the equivalent of people that just can't load enough gear on their effects board or guitars or anything. Just gearheads, right? Just can't. It's just a hunger where people accumulate VSTs on top of VSTs. I'm actually quite the minimalist person. There's a lot of stock stuff, whether it be compressors or EQ or Verb that I use and all that. I do use a few VSTs. That's probably one piece of feedback I could give to myself. Experiment more with more VSTs and things. It's something I'll probably be looking more to kind of diversify my sound going forward. But as of right now, it's pretty minimalist, man. I gotta be honest, because with the Maschine, there's so much. Massive came with it, and that's one of the synths I use a lot. Yeah. I use Serum, so that's a VST. There's a couple other, Reverb and there's another VST, the Mushroom Pusher, Infected Mushroom Pusher. Just a couple of handfuls of ones that I use. But you do get people that are just they just live and breathe VSTs and new plugins and stuff.
So is there hardware that's attached to Maschine or?
Yeah, so basically what that is, it's like the software and stuff, and the thing that comes with it is basically, I don't know if you've ever seen Ableton Push before, but it's basically the Coke to Pepsi to that, right? Okay. It's a dummy MIDI trigger, right? And again, it's speaking to more minimalist about how I do. Like, I literally, I have a pretty modest setup. Like I have some Rockets for reference, and most of the time, I'm just crafting by using that software and using that MIDI trigger. Truly, I had a keyboard up to it a little while ago, but I don't even have one right now, just because I compose using penciling and using that MIDI trigger and stuff like that. Like, people are often a little bit amazed and perplexed at how minimalist I am, but again, it's just that workflow that I've created for myself, right? And until I find that I'm limited or I'm kind of cursing under my breath, like I can't do this or that because I don't have something. It's kind of like if it's not broke, don't fix it kind of thing, right? But I'm certainly going to keep in mind limitations that I'm faced. I'm not going to be in denial about that at the same time.
You did a remix of I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this wrong, a J-Wolf, Lost.
J-Wolf, yeah.
Okay. What did you use for the bass line in that? Was that massive, or it sounds like kind of like a 303 or?
That's a really good question. You know what? That synth is a synth. So that's funny because that remix, that's a song that I literally, that's literally something I literally had in the library of songs that I made for years. And it's one of those, things that went through all these different works and stuff. I think that's a good question of what synth that actually is. I don't even think it's massive. I'd have to go back and check, but it's, that's a synth that I actually really hold dear because I actually used that in another remix I did by Nitrix called Under Electric Skies. It's a very 80s sounding synth. It's beautiful. I try not to overuse it too much because it's one of those things in moderation. But that's one of those tracks that I literally had. And then all of a sudden I remember, and that happens a lot where I have these tracks that I write and then I'm just taking vocals and laying it over. And it's that aha moment where it fits like a glove. And I'm like, holy shit, we're obviously going to go with this. A lot of my remixes too have nothing to do with the original other than the vocals, right? So I could literally take that, and I don't know how to pronounce that name, so it might be J-Wolf or J-Wolf, but I could literally take those lyrics off and that whole track could be an original, right? I could literally get somebody to top over it and that be an original track. And that's really how I always made originals. I never use instrumental samples from them. Not to say that that's not a bad thing, but generally I never do it. And basically, if you just pull the vocals off, it could just be an original tune.
That's a good way to work. I'm the same way when I do remixes. I don't like it sounding like, because then what's the point? Going back to Nine Inch Nails,
totally.
They have those remix albums. And the worst Nine Inch Nails remix albums or songs are the ones that just sound like the original song. You want those fucked up remixes. I feel a little, and not to say that that's wrong, but I feel a little bit cheaper if I were to make a remix. Not to say that's wrong, but I try to make the remix sound as diverse as possible type thing. So that's really what I go for. Adam, thank you so much for your time. I totally appreciate it. I have a couple more questions. I have a couple more questions if you don't mind me asking you.
Yeah.
How do you write a catchy song? What's some generalized tips?
That's a big question. It's a lot of experimenting. Trying different things. I know that's a little bit vague, but a catchy song, I'll say this: it's not the notes you play, it's how you play them. So, if I were to, make a catchy song, a 4-chord arrangement that would sound otherwise generic on a guitar that has been used by Blink-182, Nirvana, and every pop or band you can think of for 20 years, you can still make that arrangement as long as you make the chords sound different, the tempo different, the atmosphere different. You can make a fairly catchy song using a pretty simple formula. You really can. There's really, truly only 5 or 6 chord progressions that I find that I kind of fall back to. That tend to make these really catchy songs. I know that's a little bit of a secret I'm letting out, but I mean, it generally is no secret to any producer who is able to do the same. So it's just a matter of finding that chord progression and then finding that lead on top of it that kind of gives you that little shiver up your spine. That's really the best way I can put it.
This is a similar question, but it's a little bit different. What makes a good song? Because a good song doesn't necessarily have to be catchy, Does it? That's a great question. That's one I'm still trying to figure out because there's a lot of songs that's a really good question because sometimes I doubt my own judgment because some songs I think are going to blast off tend to do mediocre and other songs that I write off tend to be the biggest songs I've ever done. Right. So what makes a good song is it speaks to the subjectivity of art and music. And it's something I don't think either of us can answer. It's just sometimes just music just touches people's soul in a very large quantity. And I remember Eminem saying this before in an interview before. He's like, I put out a lot of songs. I really can't tell you why some songs do better than the others. Because as artists, I would guess that this song would do great when really it doesn't, and sometimes others do amazing. So,
Yeah,
well,
that's the best way I can answer that question.
How about going back to Tears for Fears? Everybody wants to rule the world. Why is that a great song? That's you when that song comes on, especially the intro. It doesn't matter who you are. It's kind of like, or even Huey Lewis in the News. You listen to Hip to Be Square, and it's like, fuck, that is like an awesome song. Not to sound like Patrick Bateman.
I think it's certainly a combination of certain melodies that just make people's it just makes people perk up. It's that combination of that melody, and I think another big thing too that I'm getting a little bit more of a grasp on is making lyrics that just really make people fall into the song. Welcome to your life. There's no turning back. You cannot tell me that there's not one person that listens to that and can't apply that to some scenario or trial or tribulation in their life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The latest song I did with Michael Lanza, his alias is Levy Blue, he wrote the lyrics, wait for you. I will wait for you. I will wait for you. This was during quarantine when everybody was locked up. So we dropped this song and it does really well. It's over 100,000 streams on Spotify now and 250,000 streams on YouTube. And it was one of these songs I heard and I was like, okay, it turned out pretty well. We'll see how it does. And then it did so well. And I had people reaching out saying, oh my God, this song is so good. It's so catchy. Another thing that Mike did in that song was he just did a really catchy melody where he's humming. And the more I listen, I'm like, yeah, I can see why this song really took off, because it's about people relating to the lyrics, right? Listening to the lyrics and fully making it feel like in that moment, this song was written for me.
Yeah, you're very successful on Spotify, right?
I'm okay. Like that's the biggest song I've done. I plan to do a lot more in the next few years. But I'm certainly, and it's about, it's making connections and having labels help you distribute the song and stuff like that. That was the biggest hit I've had so far. So here's to having a few more here by the end of the year, hopefully.
Because I think you're at like 70,000 monthly listeners or something like that, right?
At one point it was, yeah. So the monthly listeners the monthly listeners will kind of fluctuate, right? Because if you have a hit song, it'll be really high. And then in between songs, you're going to go down a little bit more. I can't remember where it was, where it has been. I had an unfortunate incident, and I won't take up much more time, but just due to distribution error, that song "Wait for You" actually disappeared last week, just due to an issue with the distributor, and that was a little bit of a stressful moment for me. But it's back up now with its stream, so all is well. But I'm optimistic about the next 12 to 24 months with regards to the songs I'm going to be putting out and the reception.
I got hit with a disclaimer from DistroKid saying that because I sampled someone, I don't know who it was. And they said, if you do this again, we're going to remove your entire catalog from the stores. I was like, oh, shit.
It's funny you said that, because the issue that I had was with DistroKid as well. But I never fully knew what happened. But anyways, we got it back up with another distributor, so it's all good. Yeah, you have to be careful sampling. I've had songs taken down. I remixed Eminem, taken down by Universal Music, strike on my SoundCloud. So you have to be very good. That's when I stopped doing bootlegs and stuff, because it's just not worth it, and they'll nail you for sure.
And it's kind of weird too, because especially with Eminem, when you're that big, you've achieved such a high status. It's like, I don't know. I don't want to get into an intellectual property debate, but it kind of seems like, bro, chill. Your songs are just as known as Happy Birthday or we wish you a Merry Christmas, right? This should be public domain now. For sure. And I think if it was up to M or anybody, they would be like, I don't fucking care. Yeah. But I think it's more or less it's Universal Music, right? It's the publishing company that really come after you. I know Sony are pretty bad for it too, and SoundCloud, people gotten a lot of strikes and stuff like that. One thing I did hear about Spotify though is you can post covers. And don't quote me on that. I don't know if that's been updated, but I do know that I've had friends that have uploaded covers of songs, and for some reason they're okay. So I'm not really sure why. Before we go, the last question I'll ask you, and then we could start plugging your projects. How did you spend your quarantine? I don't think I asked that. I've been asking that for everybody. Usually that's the question I asked at the beginning, but because for some people it's either I was super creative, or for other people it's like, oh, I was just playing video games. So my quarantine was, I actually work up here with Alberta Health Services, and our work became much more heavy due to the issue. So I worked a lot. But I got really adapted to working from home, which is quite amazing, which I hope to continue to do to some extent. And it did give me more time to hone in on the musical projects too, for sure. I was more productive.
Maybe a little bit. Like I'm not going to say it put me through the roof, but it did. It, because I was working from home, and things like that, I wouldn't be as mentally exhausted getting home from work and not being able to plug in. It was a little bit of an easier transition because I was already home and I could just close one laptop and open up the other. So quarantine was, it was one of those things that put us all to the test where, we all kind of process it differently. You could just wallow and not move and not exercise and eat crappier. And you could have done whatever you want, but you kind of have to think about what effect that's going to have on you as a person and your well-being. So I really tried to not let it affect me in a negative way. And it really didn't. Ironically, the people who I hadn't talked to in years, we became more, connected on Zoom. I found other ways to work out. The music got a little bit better because, again, I had a little bit more mental energy to do it. So I spent quarantine wisely. Let's just say that.
For me, the working out thing was a pain in the ass. I started using a cinder block as a weight, and I ended up pinching a nerve in my back.
Oh, no. Oh, crap. Oh, no.
So I had to get off that for a few weeks. But, Is there going to be a second wave? Do you have any inside baseball on the COVID-19 stuff? Or?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I can't speak to that. I really don't know. There's just so many unknowns. And it seems like every prediction I made with this thing so far with the information I was given was wrong. So no comments.
Okay, cool.
I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to say.
All right. Well, Glowbrain, Adam, thank you very much. I totally appreciate it. Where can people reach you if they want to know more?
If you want to reach me, reach out to me. I love hearing from anybody. Reach out to me on Instagram. Reach out to me on Facebook. You can write me on SoundCloud. I have an email, glowbrain.music@gmail.com. Any social that you're able to contact me, feel free to reach out to me.
Excellent. And do you have any projects coming up that we look forward to? Or?
Yeah, so I do have the next little while mapped out. I have a song coming out on Plugged Records in the middle to late July called Wings. So that's a song. I'm working on a remix with a band called the Catherines from Vancouver, three-piece who are super talented. So I have stems of theirs that I'm working on a really nice future-based remix. And then I have another song with Michael Lanza coming out in, maybe in the fall called New World, kind of a gloomy electronica song, but it hits a lot of the feels. So I have the next half year planned out, so I'm really excited for it.
Excellent. Cool. Well, thank you so much. Totally appreciate your time, and sorry for all the confusion
in the beginning.
It's been
a pleasure. No, it's all good. Pleasure.
Excellent. Okay, cool. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.